Hello! Thank you very much for coming to my talk about DAW interchange formats and the benefits of free-range users. My name is Will, and I've been a classical sound engineer for a little over a decade. So while I'm not qualified to talk to you about niche C++ concepts, I do feel qualified to talk to you about using DAWs day in and day out. Now, I wouldn't be here if I didn't also do some programming, and throughout my 10 years of putting microphones in front of people, I've also written a variety of internal tools and designed hardware units to aid in efficient production and post-production for classical recordings, and more recently I've been turning one of those tools into a commercial product. It's through designing post-production workflows and the development of some of these internal tools that I've come to spend quite a lot of time with DAW interchange formats. The rest of this talk won't make much sense unless you're familiar with what a DAW interchange format is. Essentially, it's a text file that a user can export which describes everything they've done in their project in DAWA, and they can then import that file into DAWB, and as if by magic, the second DAW will reflect the work that they did in the first DAW. This enables users to mix and match DAWs for different parts of their workflow. These users who aren't locked into a single DAW to complete their whole project are what I call free-range users. They're able to freely roam and choose what's best for them at any given moment in their workflow. Mechanisms to transfer projects between DAWs have been around for a very long time. Historically, they've been set up to deal primarily with the exact position of audio on the timeline, alongside basic mixer settings and automation. Some more recent formats also include information about plugins and plugin states, and have support for MIDI data. To understand this a bit better, we'll have a very quick look at three interchange formats, ranging from one that was released a few decades ago to one that was released just a couple of years ago. CMX EDL was originally released in the early 1970s as a way to transfer data between nonlinear video editors. It's very much geared towards translating the exact position of media clips on a timeline. It's a basic text-based format, which describes the SMPTE timecode of events, so all these timings are accurate down to a frame. Some DAWs also integrate it as a method for both transferring an audio edit from your DAW to a nonlinear video editor, but also for transferring edits between DAWs. As you can see, the important elements are the name of the clip, the start and end positions on your timeline, and the start and end positions within the file, with respect to that file's internal timecode. It's very straightforward and pretty good if you're doing a rough comp in one DAW and you want to transfer that to another DAW or nonlinear video editor. But, because it was designed with video editors in mind, it doesn't transfer other data that we might want in the audio world, like accurate crossfades or any mixer data, and it's only guaranteed to transfer data for the first 4 tracks of your timeline. That brings us to AES-31. This format was released in 2001, and was primarily adopted by specialist classical DAWs like Sadie and Pyramix. Like CMX EDL, it describes the position of different clips on the timeline, but it takes things a few steps further. It increases the accuracy of all timings down to the audio sample, so rather than say a 30th of a second for a CMX EDL, you're looking at perhaps 1/48,000th of a second for AES-31. It describes crossfades not only in length, but in shape. It implements some transfer of mixers by describing fader positions, pan values, and mute states. It provides a list of all the audio clips used in the project and where to find them on the hard drive. It contains loads of metadata information about the project, including the sample rate, and it can handle any number of audio tracks. This is obviously a big improvement, and the extremely accurate description of crossfades and clip positioning made it ideal for classical DAWs. However, the lack of support for describing plugins and MIDI files hampered its adoption in mainstream pop DAWs. As far as I'm aware, Bitwig's DAWproject is the latest interchange format to be released. Having been released in 2023, it aims to be a more complete DAW interchange format. It's an XML-based solution, and has support for MIDI files, markers, and even track colors, and crucially, plugins and plugin states. It leaves out some of the really accurate crossfade descriptions from AES-31, but it adds elements that are more widely important. So, now you're incredibly well aware of what a DAW interchange format is, why should you care? On the face of it, Doesn't it seem like allowing your users to transfer out of your software is a bad idea? Because then they won't remain in your ecosystem and might find a competitor's product that they prefer, and then you'll lose out on money? I would argue the opposite. Let's pretend we are on the team at the fictional DAW WAD. Will's awesome, DAW. We are well known for being fantastic for tracking. We've got absolutely rock solid uptime, internal latency down to almost nothing, and brilliant on-the-fly comping. But because we've poured so much of our time and resources into that, our mixing capabilities don't quite stack up against our competition. Or at least don't match up for some subset of our users. Maybe we're great for basic audio mixing, but we don't have proper clip gain, our MIDI editing's a bit clunky or bug-prone, and our plugin parameter automation leaves something to be desired. If we at WAD decide that we're not going to think about a DAW interchange format as part of our core product, then the only users who are fully able to use our product are those who aren't worried about mixing and MIDI editing. Alternatively, what happens if we add a DAW interchange format? Those people who would have previously felt unable to use our DAW at all because it doesn't fit all their needs, well, they're able to use WAD for what it's best at, before transferring the project to another DAW to do the parts of their project that they would find frustrating to do in WAD. Now, that isn't to say that we shouldn't try to improve our DAW. Obviously, that's the aim. But anyone who's spent time really using a DAW will know that no DAW can be all things to all people. Every DAW has its pros and cons. With a DAW interchange format, we'd make it possible for people to use our DAW for its pros without needing to deal with its cons. The users who were already using our product and were happy with it will stay, but we make it possible for more people to use our product for part of their project. Essentially, if users are able to move in and out of our DAW freely, making them free-range users, we make it possible for more people to use our product to solve aspects of their workflow. And that is the crux of my argument. More users, more profit. I believe that the additional development time cost of adding a DAW interchange import and export option to WAD would be eclipsed by the additional revenue from more people being able to use the software. The only instance in which this doesn't work is if the entire unique selling point of your DAW is that you are the industry standard. But frankly, I don't think that's a good enough USP, and certainly not one that we should be trying to emulate. We should be trying to build a DAW that people want to use, rather than one they are forced to use. Enabling your clients to be free-range users also opens the gates for the users themselves to build solutions for niche workflows. Sometimes people will share those things with the world, and suddenly even more people view your product as viable for them. This point is probably less commercially focused than what I've been talking about up until now, but I suspect everyone here can understand wanting to be able to build your own solutions to niche problems. That's part of the beauty of the Audio Developers Conference, isn't it? Everyone here is both a creative and the sort of person who has the skills to write some software of their own, even if it's only for internal use. Sound engineering has a rich history of people building their own stuff to fix issues. Decca is still using bits of hardware that a sound engineer made 40 years ago because it solved a problem they had with TalkBack, and that proud tradition continues today. I see DAW interchange formats as another opportunity for that to happen. Unfortunately, poorly implemented DAW interchange import and export is common, and can be worse than no interchange format at all. This often seems to come as a result of DAW interchange formats being added as an afterthought. At WAD, we are of course keen to learn from the mistakes of others, so we're going to look at a couple of real-world examples of issues in implementations of DAW interchange formats, and make some suggestions for what the team at WAD could do to avoid those sorts of issues in our work. So, to be clear, these are issues that I've actually come across when I've been working with AES31 and Final Cut Pro XML exports when building my own software. So, while the next section is technically entitled Real-World Issues, the Moan Zone would also be an acceptable title. The first issue isn't too egregious, but it increases the barrier to entry and difficulty of use unnecessarily. The AES31 standard specifies that the audio files used must be WAV files, and as such, most DAWs will export a set of audio files alongside the AES31 text file. This can be handy if you originally recorded in a different format, like Pyramix's PMF audio files. In SADI, you can either export the AES31 text file with this set of WAV files, or just the AES31 text file on its own. Or at least it says you can. Unfortunately, the export without media function is broken, and has been for over a decade. This means that you're left with no choice but to export all the audio files, which doubles the hard drive space required, and means that the export process takes much longer, as you're writing gigabytes to disk rather than just kilobytes. It's a simple fix, but one that has never been attended to. A suggestion for WAD? Well, if we're implementing quality of life functions, we need to make sure they work. We should also make it easy for our users to report bugs, and we should make sure that we have a system in place for dealing with those bugs. This next one is much more egregious, and makes the AES31 export and import functions in Pyramix completely useless in many cases. For context, classical audio people love high sample rates. Whether it's placebo or not is not the topic of this talk, but it's not uncommon to see classical recordings made at 192 kHz, and sometimes even higher than that. The issue with Pyramix's AES31 export comes at sample rates of above 96 kHz, so we're going to use 192K as our example. If you look at an AES31 export from Pyramix for a 192 kHz project, you'll notice two strange things. First is that the sample rate flag in the project metadata section states 44.1K rather than 192K. And the second is that every single timestamp is wrong, by a lot. In fact, it turns out that every timecode is out by a factor of 4.35 roughly. Those of you whose mental maths is better than mine might have already figured out that that is the exact ratio of 192 to 44.1. What's happening is that Pyramix is storing all the timing data for each clip as a number of audio samples, which is a perfectly sensible thing to do, given that that is the resolution it needs to report them at. What's not sensible is that it is then taking the number of samples in a 192 kHz sample rate piece of audio and converting it to a SMPTE timecode using 44.1 kHz logic. This means that a clip of audio placed 1 hour into your timeline will instead look like it's placed roughly 4 hours, 21 minutes, and 13 seconds in. This non-standard behaviour does four importantly terrible things. 1. You can't export a 192 kHz project from Pyramix and open it in another DAW because all the timings are wrong. 2. It means you can't import an exported file from another DAW for a 192 kHz project because the import logic is faulty. In fact, on import it multiplies all the timings by 44.1 times 2 divided by 48. I don't fully get that one. 3. You can't import a 192 kHz AES31 file created in Pyramix back into Pyramix. And 4. Due to our old programming friend overflows, if there is any data that should be a number greater than 5 hours, 30 minutes, and 45 seconds, the reported timecode will overflow past the 24-hour maximum you can store in SMPTE timecode, and therefore will go past 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds again. That means it's extremely difficult for an enterprising user or another DAW to reverse this issue, because you can't just divide by 4.35. In the instance of errors like this, a user who believed they would be able to utilize an AES31 import or export may be deep into their project before they discover it isn't possible, and will suddenly find themselves trapped, and certainly not a free-range user. So, how can WAD avoid similar issues? By testing. Realistically, this issue could have been caught with relatively straightforward testing, but it does highlight the need to test with more than a single setup. If WAD only tests exports at 44.1 kHz, or with 24-bit audio, or projects that only use the first 10 minutes of a timeline, then we might not catch issues like this. Robust testing is important. My last woe isn't DAW specific, but is instead about poorly documented or difficult to access interchange formats. The documentation for the original Final Cut Pro XML interchange format for nonlinear video editors has rubbish documentation. Conversely, the newer Final Cut Pro X XML interchange format has beautifully laid out clear documentation, which makes it much easier to implement. AES31 suffers in a different way, in that the documentation is only accessible if you are a member of the Audio Engineering Society, adding yet another barrier to those who want to implement it. If developers have to battle through difficult to parse, difficult to navigate, or difficult to get hold of documentation in order to implement an interchange format, one of two things is likely to happen. One, the implementation will be wrong, leading to bugs or errors like the ones we've just talked about, making it less likely to work smoothly. Or two, the developers will give up, meaning the interchange format is never implemented at all because the cost to implement it exceeds the budget. In a world where interchange formats are often given a lower priority, making the implementation of the interchange format straightforward feels important. So what can we do at WAD? Not a huge amount, other than considering the quality and availability of the documentation when deciding which DAW interchange format or formats to support. So, now we can heave ourselves out of the moan zone and return to the point. Why and how should you prioritize DAW interchange formats and free-range users? Simply put, including a DAW interchange format means more people can use your DAW, even if they can't use it for everything. It enables new DAWs to be in the hands of consumers sooner, showing the things that they excel at, even while there are some elements that lag behind. For well-established DAWs, it allows more users to use your software to help with elements of their workflow, and your existing users will still remain. I would suggest that a DAW interchange format should be a priority because it makes business sense. Never mind the fact that it provides a more flexible experience for consumers and opens the doors, if you'll pardon the pun, for people to make their own tools to interface with or modify projects made in your DAW. For a moderately small additional step in your process, you can enable a whole host of benefits. As for how, I think it comes down to two things. One, researching the kind of interchange format or formats you want to work with. If your DAW is all about MIDI, then perhaps CMX isn't a great fit. If you've got the choice between two formats and one has easier to parse documentation, then that one is more likely to be profitable for you to implement. And giving the implementation of a DAW interchange format enough priority in the development plan that thorough testing is possible. If it's something that your development team are being incentivized to get right rather than rush through, then the likelihood of your implementation working properly is, of course, much higher. So, my recommendation to you, whether you're working on a DAW or a completely different kind of project, consider how you can allow free-range users in your products. I think you might just find that it makes business sense. Thank you very much for listening. Despite not being there to present live, I am currently in the Discord channel, so if you've got any other questions or comments, please send them my way. And I hope everybody really enjoys the rest of ADCx Gather 2025.